Hello and welcome to the Feck It Fun, Fabulous and Free Eating Disorder Recovery podcast. I'm Helly and I'm here to provide regular bursts of information and inspiration, some neuroscience applicable to eating disorder recovery, perhaps a few rants, but otherwise lots of positivity with a bit of a feck it attitude, some fun and a sprinkling of fabulousness to help everyone find freedom in recovery. Hello all my lovely listeners and welcome to this episode of the Feck It Fun, Fabulous and Free Eating Disorder Recovery podcast. As most of you will probably know, I'm Helly and I'm your host of this podcast where we talk about eating disorders and how to overcome them, because I very much believe that everybody has the potential to bash the eating disorder out of their life and find freedom in a life that will be so much better without an eating disorder part of it. This episode today is going to be talking about anger and angry eating when it comes to overcoming an eating disorder. So we're often taught from a very young age to avoid anger, and that anger is a bad thing and a very negative human emotion that we should all be suppressing. But like all emotions, anger has a purpose and it's there for a reason. And with an eating disorder, you're likely to have learnt that the eating disorder was an excellent tool to suppress any feelings of anger that you might have otherwise had. And as you overcome the eating disorder and you stop using the behaviours and the pursuit of energy deficit to numb your challenging feelings and emotions, anger is something that you're likely to experience, perhaps even with little warning at times. And that's when you're going to need to find and develop new ways to manage anger, not by resorting back to the eating disorder and trying to numb it in that way or to block it or suppress it, but to allow the anger and to manage it. And in my experience, the power of anger can have benefits in overcoming an eating disorder if you direct that anger in the right way, to bash the eating disorder, to get mad at it and to push it out of your life. Firstly though, when you consider why humans evolved to experience anger and why it's such a common human emotion, you realise that anger is a protective, defensive, and even motivating emotion. We experience anger if someone or something is threatening us, and it's a way to try to defend ourselves from the threat, or as a way to defend someone or something else that we care a lot about. So anger can help us be able to stand up for ourselves. It can help empower us in defending what matters most to us, and even give us a greater sense of control over a situation. And anger can inspire more optimism and help us push ourselves towards goals that are hard but that really, really matter to us. Anger can also help us to communicate better in relationships, and it increases our self-awareness and our insight. It really helps us to identify what matters to us, what our values really are, and where we aren't living by those values. Because obviously when we're not living by our true values, we can then experience more sensations of anger and frustration about that. And being able to express anger prevents those powerful emotions from being kept within us in ways that only then grow and become more harmful, leading to self-destructive, numbing behaviours, such as through an eating disorder, or otherwise eventually leading to an explosive outburst in more violent and destructive ways. And of course, anger is an emotion that can have a lot of energy and power behind it, which, if used in the right way, can be a positive and impactful thing to push towards goals and towards the things that really matter to us in our lives, such as, hopefully, overcoming an eating disorder. But before going any further, I'm just going to put in the caveat that, of course, anger that is allowed to become overly explosive or violent or out of control isn't helpful. And more support would be necessary to help you if you're experiencing anger to that extreme. So what I'm talking about here is being able to get that balance between allowing in the anger you're feeling and learning to use it constructively, while not letting it take you to levels in which you truly feel at risk of harming yourself or others, as obviously that's when more support to help you manage that level of anger is going to be very critical to find and to use. So there's a lot of power then to anger. There's a lot of power in my mind to using angry eating in overcoming an eating disorder. And that's what I'm going to talk about now. Because anger is such a powerful and forceful emotion, if it's directed in the right way when you experience it, it can really hurt the eating disorder. So if you again go back to consider the role of anger as a human emotion, and that anger is designed to help protect us from something or someone that wants to hurt us, providing us with the force, power, and sense of aggression to fight off a threat, then you could start to understand how anger can be advantageous to the process of eating disorder bashing. Because eating disorders are ultimately perhaps one of the biggest threats you're ever going to face. So to use anger to an advantage, take any anger that you experience and recognize that it's coming from your authentic self. That anger that you're experiencing is the real you who is desperate to be free of the eating disorder, experiencing this powerful emotion in order to defend what matters most to you in your life. But this is also where it gets more complicated, as when you're trying to target that anger towards the eating disorder, and the eating disorder is also within you at the moment, and it's also part of you at the moment, it's important to separate the eating disorder from yourself. You need to imagine the eating disorder as a separate entity, a parasite perhaps that's within you, but it isn't you. Because if you can't make that separation between the true you and the eating disorder, then you're going to be directing that anger towards yourself, which obviously isn't ideal. But direct the anger towards the separate entity of the eating disorder, that parasite that you want to destroy, and the force of that emotion that you have within you can be so powerful. Allow your authentic self to get so angry and mad at the eating disorder and all it's taken from you. How rigid, controlling, uptight and anxious it makes you. And choose to use that anger to rage against the eating disorder. Eat to piss off the eating disorder, because angry eating can be so very effective sometimes. Well, it certainly was in my case, and I know that some of my clients find it very effective too. And as you do so, as you use that anger, feel powerful. Because when you are doing this is you in control and being powerful. This is you on top, defending your future, defending all your inner values and what matters most to you now and in your future. Eat your way there. Show the eating disorder that you are a force to be reckoned with. But when you've not been used to acknowledging anger for a long time because the eating disorder has been blocking it, for what might be years before it even enters your conscious awareness, getting feelings that could be labelled as anger again might be hard to recognise as such at first. The emotions that start to bubble up when you're going through the process of overcoming the eating disorder and giving up the numbing eating disorder behaviours and pursuit of energy deficit can leave you feeling overwhelmed and confused when they first set in. So an awareness of some of the common signs or symptoms of anger can help so that you're able to start to recognise if anger is something you're experiencing and not acknowledging, And you can recognize some of these signs and symptoms and start to label them as anger, recognize them for what they are, acknowledge them, allow them to be there, and don't try to suppress them, but use them in a beneficial way. So some of the signs and symptoms of anger include emotional outbursts or crying, feeling very shaky, being irritable, feeling resentment build towards others. Perhaps it can be withdrawal from others and isolation, being very defensive. You might experience an increased heart rate. You might start arguing with yourself or with others and getting upset over very small things. You might experience more physical sensations as well, of jaw clenching, feeling very clammy, headaches, generally feeling that you're carrying a lot of tension in your body. You might experience nausea and a tight chest. Or you might, when it's really setting in, feel an energy surge that you feel you need to expend in quite an aggressive way. Or you might find that you're experiencing a lot more episodes of road rage or feeling annoyed by strangers who are in your way in a shop or on the street. Or you might find that you really have strong urges at the moment to be slamming doors, to throw things, to punch a pillow and to scream. These are a few of the most common signs and symptoms of anger that it's building within you. And of course, some of these can also be symptoms of more generalized anxiety or even of refeeding effects when you're overcoming an eating disorder. But if you are experiencing several of these symptoms at once and the feelings are building with force, it's a good bet that a likely cause is anger that's rising up within you. So if you do sense this, firstly, recognize the symptoms and recognize that you are feeling angry. Label it. Don't judge yourself for being angry. As I said before, anger is there for a reason and it shouldn't be ignored or pushed back down as a bad thing. Acknowledge the anger and allow it. Anger is valid. You have a right to be angry. Then try to establish why it's there and how to direct it so that it serves you rather than hurts you or hurts other people. When you're overcoming an eating disorder, it's very likely that you will find yourself experiencing regular episodes of frustration, anxiety, exhaustion, disappointment in yourself that you haven't pushed further, because the eating disorder loves to make people feel their attempts at recovery aren't good enough, and other emotions of shame, guilt, regret, and general impatience. And some of this will be coming from feeling that you aren't going far enough at bashing the eating disorder, while some will come from guilt at, did I really eat that much? Look how big my belly is now, and other inappropriate but real thoughts and emotions that directly stem from the eating disorder. And this all leaves you stuck in the middle with these ongoing conflicting thoughts and feelings, not knowing which way to turn, so you're just left feeling exhausted and just wanting to scream. And as you're going through all of this, episodes of anger will also come along, and when they do, it's possible you will automatically try to direct that anger in the wrong direction. You might automatically direct any anger that comes up either inwardly towards yourself, getting mad at yourself for either not eating enough and failing at recovery again, or maybe being angry at yourself for having eaten that burger at lunch when you could have just had the salad instead. Or you might find you direct the anger at loved ones or people around you, perhaps allowing in resentment towards them that they are just happily going about their daily lives and eating burgers without thought or not noticing that you only had a salad when they're supposed to be supporting you. It's now that you have to firstly notice the anger is there and then recognize that you are directing that anger in an unhelpful and inappropriate direction. Now it's time to redirect that anger towards the thing that is the real culprit in all of this, and that, as I think you can probably realize, is the eating disorder. As I said before, the anger is valid. There's nothing about your experience of anger that is inappropriate. You have a right to be angry. The eating disorder has made your life miserable for far too long, and it's not fair you have an eating disorder. It's not fair it has taken so much potential from your life to enjoy all the good things that others can take for granted. It's not fair that you don't get to be the smaller size and shape you really want to be and not have an eating disorder. It sucks, and you have a right to feel angry about that. So let yourself feel it and direct that anger at what's really creating it. After all, anger is an emotion with an evolved purpose to defend ourselves from a threat and protect what matters most to us from something threatening. And so it's important to use that anger at the real threat. And the real threat here is not you, and it's not your loved ones who are doing their best to get it right and how to support you. The real threat is the eating disorder that created all the misery in your life in the first instance. And that's what you should be directing this anger towards. So when the anger is there, direct the force and the power behind it at really pushing the eating disorder further out your life with a massive, almighty, and violent, if you like, shove. Angry eat. Rest with a passion. Decide you won't go for that walk today. You won't purge or compensate in other ways, but you will proudly aim for overshoot. And you will have your life of freedom. Get angry, get determined, shove that eating disorder out of your life with force, with food, with rest, with determination. Show the eating disorder that you are in charge now. Show yourself that you are in charge now. Show the world that you are in charge and you are going to do all it takes to get this eating disorder out of your life as fast as you can and with as much force as you can. Get mad at it and force it out. And I know in my case that there were times that getting angry and managing to redirect that anger from targeting it at myself or at the world in general and towards the eating disorder instead made such a difference. There were occasions that the anger built and I used it to charge at the food, at the process of overcoming the eating disorder with a more powerful force, screaming almost, bring it on, to the eating disorder and to the threats it was creating in my thoughts, that eating more or gaining more weight would only lead to feelings of regret later. And when I look back on those episodes of angry eating disorder bashing, I can recognize how monumental those times were. You can't force those episodes. You can't force the anger to be there. But when it does come, use it to your advantage so the anger serves you and it doesn't hurt you or the people you do really care about and who are doing their best to help you. And after the anger has passed, because it always will, allow the hangover from the anger that will also inevitably set in. Powerful and strong emotions are energy draining. They're mentally, physically, and of course emotionally very draining. And anger is no different to how drained you might feel after a good cry when you feel sad, or even how tired you might feel after a real exhilarating episode of being on a high. So when the anger has subsided, let yourself relax into a feeling of victory, that you are winning and on top, and let the feelings of being happily and proudly worn out then set in. Anger is exhausting, and so respect that fact. Recognize how energy draining being angry was, and that you will have an emotional, physical, and mental hangover effect from it. You're likely to feel tired, probably even more hungry, and it's important then to respect this. Let yourself wallow in pride in the aftermath of the angry episode, while resting, eating more and honouring your body and your emotional and mental needs. Anger is a powerful emotion, and it, alongside angry eating, can be used to make really forceful steps towards overcoming the eating disorder and forwards in really bashing it when you use that anger appropriately. Don't deny anger when it's there. Don't try to suppress it or push it away using numbing habits, but invite it in when it does bubble up and direct it at the threat that will destroy your life entirely if it can otherwise. And that's the eating disorder. So use the anger. Direct that anger at the eating disorder. Don't direct it towards yourself. And don't feel ashamed of anger. Don't try to suppress anger. There's nothing wrong with anger as an emotion. It's valid, it's real, it's powerful, and it can be a real benefit and a real advantage to you. So I hope that has helped some of you. I hope it's given you a little bit more motivation and helped you manage more of your emotions. Realize that any emotions you experience, they're nothing to be ashamed of. As humans, we're supposed to have a range of emotions, and emotions evolved for a reason. Even the emotions that we might have been taught as children are not to be engaged in or are to be suppressed. I don't believe any emotions should be suppressed. We should learn how to deal with them, how to manage them in valid and non-harmful ways. So if you want to know more about eating disorders and how to overcome them, and if you want to understand my theory of eating disorders as being a brain-based addiction to energy deficit, then why not pick up a copy of one of my books? So there are 2 books that I've now written and published. One of them is called Addicted to Energy Deficit, and that's a neuroscience-based guide to restrictive eating disorders. And the second book is called Aiming for Overshoot, and that's a more practical handbook with some tips and tools in how to go about day-to-day overcoming an eating disorder. You'll find both books available on most online bookselling platforms around the world, and otherwise you'll find a lot more information about me on hellybarnes.com. And I will speak to you very soon. Keep eating disorder bashing. It is difficult, it is hard, it is challenging, but you can do it and it will be worth it. Thank you for listening to the Feck It Fun, Fabulous and Free Eating Disorder Recovery podcast. Don't forget, eating disorder recovery doesn't have to be boring and doesn't have to be serious. Now go and grab yourself some food and have a fabulous rest of the day.